practically. 120,000 people have been executed just for supporting this movement for freedom in Iran. So there's been a very grave price paid for Iran's freedom. Where is the international outcry? What government has taken a stance against these executions, knowing that this is the start of something, knowing that this can lead to a massacre like 1988? Because the regime has been saying that if this situation comes up, this is what we need to do. We need to repeat the experience of 1988 massacre, where they had 30,000 political prisoners executed in just 5-6 weeks with international silence. And today, it is 37 years later, the world has yet to acknowledge the 1988 massacre.
Welcome to Stories and Stanza, where voices with purpose echo beyond borders and stories find rightful place in the world. Today's episode is a powerful reminder of why amplifying the voice of human rights matters. Because when we listen, we begin to understand, and when we understand, we become part of the change. In a time when truth and freedom are often silenced, sharing these narratives is not only an act of solidarity, but a step towards justice. Every voice raised for human rights carries the hope of millions, and today we bring you one such voice. Our guest, Zolal Habibi, serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. She has dedicated her life to advocating a free, democratic and secular Iran, one built on equality, dignity and respect for all. Her journey is one of courage, conviction and unwavering belief in the power of human resilience. In this episode, Zolal shares her insights on Iran's ongoing struggle for freedom, the sacrifices made along the way, and the unbreakable spirit of those who continue to fight for a better future. On behalf of Stories and Stanza, we extend our heartfelt thanks to Zolal for her time, her truth, and her tireless commitment to human rights. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza, where I'm joined by Zolal Habibi as our guest today. Hi Zolal, welcome to Stories and Stanza.
Hello, thank you for having me, and please allow me to greet those who are tuning in to the podcast today.
Thank you. In Stories and Stanza, I try to amplify the voices that need to be heard. You are on a critical and difficult mission, and you have been there all your life. I hope that your story resonates with our listeners today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am an activist with the Iranian resistance. I'm a member of the National Council of Resistance of Iran's Foreign Affairs Committee. And I have dedicated 27 years of my life to the cause of freedom in Iran. And today, more than ever, it's very important to be able to echo the voice of the people inside of Iran and those who are striving to bring about change in Iran and to bring a true democracy in Iran.
The first thing I'm curious to hear from the resistance's perspective, how do you look at this change given the challenges and the condition of today's geopolitics? Do you feel that the real change is possible? And how does that transpire?
Real change is possible. And that's very clear. And I think that has been clear the world has been seeing glimpses of it since January with the uprisings that broke out in Iran. But the reality is that the people of Iran have continuously been fighting against this regime from the onset, practically. 120,000 people have been executed just for, or killed just for supporting this movement and for freedom in Iran. So there's been a very grave price paid for Iran's freedom. Just in January alone, thousands of people were killed in the streets. 50,000 people were arrested and detained in the uprisings. And just this week, if you look, the regime has had 6 political prisoners and one of the detainees of the uprisings executed because the regime knows that the final blow will be from the people of Iran, and it fears the people of Iran more than anything else. We believe that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the people of Iran to bring about change with their organized resistance. And we think that our people have this potential and this capability to bring about that change. But till now, The reality is that there has always been the policy of appeasement, which has come to the aid of the regime and in fact has tied the hands of the people of Iran. And unfortunately, the people of Iran have been used as bargaining chips at these negotiations and at the appeasement table. So what we are asking is for the international community to recognize the people's rights to resist and to fight against this regime and to allow the people of Iran to take their destiny into their own hands. Democracy can't be installed in any country, but not in Iran. You have to understand the history behind it. In the last century, all the dictators that we've had, they've been installed in our country. So first it was Reza Khan. He was brought in by the British through a coup, military coup. Then when he wasn't serving their purposes anymore, he was taken into exile. His son was replaced by him. And then for 2 years, we had a democratic government, and that was Dr. Mossadegh, and who was the prime minister and nationalized Iran's oil. And that was not to the benefit of Western powers. And unfortunately, the US and the UK carried out a coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh in 1953 and reinstated the Shah. And the Shah ruled with the iron fist, with the savak and the executions and the torture. And the people of Iran revolted and overthrew the Shah in 1979. But unfortunately, their revolution was hijacked by Khomeini. Why? Because those who had created the revolution, the progressive movements, they were still in prison. But the Western powers, once they realized that the Shah was on the verge of falling, they brought Khomeini to France. They had meetings with him in Guadeloupe and made deals with him, and Khomeini was brought into Iran. And the people of Iran have been paying for that for 47 years now. So the people of Iran want to be able to take their destiny into their own hands. We have a organized resistance. There's going to be these scenarios that some people try to create fear that there's going to be a civil war, there will be chaos. No, it's not going to be that way because there is a organized resistance movement. There is a plan in place. The National Council of Resistance of Iran has set forth the plan for the provisional government since 1981, and it's been worked on continuously. And the NCRI's sole mission is to transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran. So that is where it's very important that they have withstood the test of time. The people of Iran know that they can trust them because these people, if they were after power or if they were after name recognition or money or whatever, there were easier ways to obtain it than dedicating 45 years of your life, day in, day out, to the fight for freedom and paying such a grave price for it in this path.
Thank you for sharing the context. You mentioned historically how we have seen all the powers have been installed by foreign agencies. Now, as Iran stands the war and facing the Western powers, how does the resistance see the Western power? Meaning there have been instances where the outcome were not favorable towards people of Iran. So how does the resistance see the Western world in today's context?
I think that as I mentioned before, I think what's important is calling on the Western world to actually stand by the people of Iran. That is not the case. That has not been the case in these decades. They have continuously chosen the regime over the people of Iran. And that is why we are in the position that we are, because the policy of appeasement, as we experienced in World War II or in history, policy of appeasement leads to a war. But war is not the solution. So right now, what's really important is for the international community to react. Just to give you an example of what I mean, like, as I mentioned, since Monday, 6 political prisoners have been executed, and one of the detainees from the protests have been executed. Where is the international outcry? what government has taken a stance against these executions, knowing that this is the start of something, knowing that this can lead to a massacre like 1988, because the regime has been saying that if this situation comes up, this is what we need to do. We need to repeat the experience of 1988 massacre, where they had 30,000 political prisoners executed in just 5-6 weeks with international silence. And today, it is 37 years later, the world has yet to acknowledge the 1988 massacre. For the first time this year, the United Nations recognized the 1988 massacre in one of their states. This is how crimes against humanity are perpetrated. This is how genocide is perpetrated. This is how with this silence. That silence is the greatest green light to the Iranian regime that, you know what, in the midst of war, you could kill all of your main opponents and all of the, political prisoners, and no one's going to peep. Not a word is going to come out of them. That is how they come to the aid of dictators. It doesn't have to be something very active, but it hasn't been just limited to that. All of the technology that the Iranian regime is using for crackdown on its people, the face recognition technology, the surveillance technologies, where is it buying these from? It's buying it from Western countries. So they are enabling this regime to crack down on its own people. For instance, unfortunately, the regime uses cranes for execution instead of for construction in Iran. There are specific companies that have been called out on the fact that, look, the cranes that you're selling to Iran is being used for execution, but they still continue. So the reality is that till now, policy of appeasement has been very strong. Some been due to economic interests, some even out of fear, because the Iranian regime has pushed for a, hostage diplomacy in recent years. And because that is the number one state sponsor of terrorism, a lot of countries fear it, and they give in to the demands of the Iranian regime. The regime's demand has always been concentrated against the people of Iran, for limiting the activities of resistance, for limiting anything that weakens its power. And unfortunately, until now, international government community has stood by the regime. So today is the time that we need to see decisive action. That doesn't mean taking, we're not asking for, as I said, troops on the ground or money or weapons or none of that. We're not asking for any of that. We have the potential to bring about that change. We're just asking the Western governments to recognize the people's right to resist and to not stop backing the regime in any form. But of course, when there's bombings over your head, you're not going to be able to do anything on the ground. But the reality is that if you look at the process, in the last few months in Iran, you could see what was coming about. In January, we saw the nationwide uprisings, which were brutally cracked down on. Unfortunately, thousands of people were killed on the streets in January. And to be able to keep control, the regime had a 19-day communication blackout. So there was not only was there internet blackout, but also like phone lines. Everything was down for practically the first week. And they had martial law throughout Iran. So that's how they were able to suppress the situation. But the people of Iran understood one thing, that considering the fact that we've had 4 major uprisings in the past decade in Iran, they saw this cycle. People come to the streets, they risk their lives, people are brutally cracked down on, thousands are killed, and then the regime is able to push them back into their homes that way. This time they knew that they can't be pushed back into their homes, because otherwise that will mean we have to wait for the next spark, and then it'll be the same cycle again. So they knew that this time we have to push this forward till the end of it. We have to bring this regime down. And that's why you saw, like, for instance, if you look about 1 week before the start of the war, it was in Iran, people usually hold a ceremony or remembrance for their loved ones who have passed 40 days after their passing. And those ceremonies all turned into forms of resistance against the regime, forms of defiance. You saw mothers celebrating the lives of their children instead of mourning them, or instead of grieving in their own sorrows. What they started doing is they turned those as a form of defiance in face of the regime, making pledges, turning those programs into places that people come and make a pledge to continue this fight till the dawn of freedom, till the overthrow of this regime. And the regime had shut down all universities and made classes online during the uprising, because they knew that the universities are one of the, centers of protest and everything, especially the Gen Z of Iran. So they resumed classes on February 22nd. On February 22nd, protests started forming in universities across Iran. The regime saw that it can't control it. Within 3-4 days, they tried and they couldn't. And so they said, all campuses have to be shut down. On February 23rd, this is just 5 days before the start of the war, we saw 250 members of the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran's resistance units carry out an operation against the headquarters of Khamenei. The headquarters of Khamenei were the most secure location in all of Iran. And this was at a time that they were on heightened security. This is at a time that there's martial law in the city. They had 8,000 security forces protecting this compound. And these 250 members of the resistance units who had organized together were able to infiltrate, and they were able to push forward. Unfortunately, it came with at a cost of the lives of many of them. About 100 of them have been either killed or detained or are missing right now. But the message that they sent with their bravery, with their steadfastness, and with this operation to the people of Iran was, first of all, the regime is in a much weaker position than it presents itself, because they're not even able to protect Pastor, where Khamenei was. And they also sent the message of hope and the continuation of the resistance, and that this is going to be the new norm. Because people realize one thing: look, we protest, the regime cracks down brutally and kills us. What are we supposed to do instead? Those protests are important and it needs to continue, but people need to be able to protect themselves, the protesters. So they need to be able to be on the offensive. They need to be able to disarm the suppressive forces, and they need to be able to protect themselves. But simultaneously, this regime is not going to go away with peaceful protest. There needs to be armed struggle. There needs to be armed resistance. And that is the role of the resistance units in Iran. And for the past 12 years, this is a strategy that the Iranian resistance has been working on. The resistance units have grown throughout Iran, carrying out awareness campaigns, first raising awareness, keeping the hope up, keeping resistance alive in society, and reminding people their rights, that they've been denied, and what needs to be done about it. But also they have carried out, like just in the past year, they carried out 4,092 operations against centers of repression in Iran. That is serving as like a guiding light for the people of Iran. Like, this is the direction we have to go to. And what we were seeing right before the start of the war is mobilization on the ground for this new chapter that we have to enter to be able to overthrow this regime. So the people of Iran have shown that they have the willpower and to be able to bring about this change. This is the path that they want to go to. They're not looking for aid from any government. They have the capability to do this themselves. But it's time for the international community to see that and recognize.
I would request anyone listening to this conversation, they go through the details that we put in our episode description so that they get to know about the resistance and what they are doing at the moment and how mission critical this is more now than ever. I was reading about you and listening to your previous podcast, and this resistance has come at a great personal cost as well for you. Would you like to share your story with the viewers of our platform?
Yes, I belong to the generation that unfortunately I haven't had the chance to see Iran. I was born and raised abroad. My parents came to the US before the revolution. But I can truly say that Iran has been part and parcel of my life every single day of my life. And the plight of my people has always been an important part of my life. But I became introduced to the human rights violations in Iran as a child. I remember meeting people who were like victims of torture when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And but I always thought that's, in Iran, we're here. My father was a writer and a human rights activist, and that is why I became aware of all of these things from a very, very young age. And my mom was also an activist. And so growing up in that atmosphere, I always understood that I shouldn't take for granted the freedoms and the liberties that I have, because, there are a lot of people who are denied those same freedoms. But when I was 7, my father was killed by the regime. And as I mentioned before, in 1988, that year, the Iranian regime had 30,000 political prisoners executed. 90% of them was for affiliation with the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran. And that really changed everything, not only in my life, but I think in the history of Iran, because that is how Khomeini was able to spread fear in society right after the end of the Iran-Iraq war. Khomeini knew that the people were devastated. They wanted answers. So they needed to do something to create that fear in society and just silence everyone. And that was the 1988 massacre. And so that really changed, I think, everything in our country. But also for me, that was also a turning point in my life, even though I was only 7 at the time. But it just brought a sense of responsibility that what are we going to do moving forward? There are 2 paths. You could say, like, our family has done its part. Let other people bear that responsibility now. Or no, does that bring more responsibility? Because you understand what is going on. You've felt it firsthand. And growing up, I was always active. Even as a teenager and whatnot, I was growing up. But when I was 18, after graduating from high school, I was on my way to go to college, study medicine. I had gotten a full scholarship and everything. But that summer, student protests broke out in Iran. And it was the first uprising in over a decade in Iran. And it was our generation who was coming to the scene this time. And I remember watching those scenes because it was the first time that this was being also televised. It was the start of cable television and cable news and CNN and whatnot. So I remember watching those scenes and thinking to myself, what are you going to do? Are you just going to be a bystander and just watch? Or are you going to do something about this situation? Because every bone in my body said I wanted to be there in the front lines and protect everyone else who was there. And so I decided to join the Iranian resistance, and I have been a member of the resistance ever since. So that's...
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. For anyone listening, or especially for the Iranian diaspora around the world, is there any misconceptions about the resistance that you would like to address today? There
are many misconceptions. The reality is that, we are up against a very manipulative regime that has, I guess, they have really aced the art of propaganda. So there's a very strong propaganda war out there. But it's very important to for people to inform themselves and to, be aware of what is actually the reality and not feeding into those lies and that are spread in the propaganda. The reality is that there are different scenarios that are fed. When it comes to the National Council of Resistance of Iran and its one of its main members of the National Council of Resistance, just to give you an exact understanding, it's a Parliament in Exile. It serves as an umbrella group where different organizations or people from different walks of life come together in this Parliament in Exile for the overthrow of the regime. It was formed in July 1981 for that sole purpose. One of the main organizations in the National Council of Resistance of Iran is the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, who have been fighting for 60 years continuously against both the mullahs and the previous dictatorship, the Shah. So 60 years of steadfastness in fighting for the cause for freedom in Iran. And they have been the ones who have paid the gravest price throughout these decades for change in Iran. And they are also the first target of disinformation and propaganda too. The People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, they have dedicated 60 years of their lives to the cause for freedom. They call for a secular democratic republic in Iran, and that is what they're striving for and working towards. There is a lot of propaganda out there about, they are Marxist Islamists. Anyone who has an understanding of political science understands that, you can't mix Marxism and Islam. It's two different ideologies. But, this is something that the Shah created back in the Cold War, and it still has been repeated by the regime and continuously. But anyone who has the slightest understanding of political science, they can navigate themselves and they understand that can't be. But, or for instance, these people they fought with Iraq against Iran in the Iran-Iraq war, and that's not true. In fact, the first 2 years of the war, the PMOI, they were actually fighting against Iraq in Iran, and at the same time, they were being targeted from the back by the IRGC. But they still continued because they were defending their country. But the minute that Iraq left Iranian soil, the National Council of Resistance of Iran presented a peace plan and called for the end of the war. Iraq agreed to that peace plan, and Khomeini didn't, because Khomeini said war is a holy matter and we will continue this war till the last house standing in Tehran, because the path to Jerusalem goes through Karbala. And that was how Khomeini needed war and crisis to be able to keep his power. And that is what he was striving on. And so actually at that time, a huge campaign started by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the peace campaign, and over 5,000 parliamentarians back then actually supported the peace plan presented by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. And then the Mujahideen, they were able to create the National Liberation Army, which was an independent entity. It was based in Iraq because that's the largest common border with Iran, 800 kilometers. And they carried out 3 operations from March 1988 till July 1988. And after the second operation, Khomeini agreed to a ceasefire. Why? Because Khomeini realized that in the war with Iraq, they will lose maximum 1 province. But in the fight with the National Liberation Army, its entire regime is going to fall. And so that's why there's that famous quote from Khomeini that I drank the chalice of poison and gave into the... And he never signed a peace treaty, just a ceasefire. And so the reality is that we owe the end of the Iran-Iraq war to the Iranian resistance. And in fact, God knows what would have happened and how long it would have continued if they had not had their activities. So things are really twisted and returned. So that's why it's really important to inform yourselves, for everyone. Due to the policy of appeasement, unfortunately, in 1997, the Iranian resistance was placed on the terrorist list in the US. And then it was followed by the other like European countries and UK and Australia and whatnot. But one by one, all of those were revoked through the courts because there was no basis for it. In fact, when the US placed the Iranian resistance on the terrorist list, the spokesperson of the State Department said, as a goodwill gesture to the newly elected moderate president of Iran, Khatami, we have placed them on the terrorist list because that was the first issue that the Iranian regime put on the negotiation table in front of everyone. And unfortunately, as I said, that's why I said we are used as the bargaining chips. And unfortunately, the people of Iran have paid a great price for that because for 15 years, instead of concentrating on fighting against the regime, we had to first concentrate on delisting the Iranian resistance. But fortunately, all courts around the world, actually, both in the UK and EU and the US, they all voted in favor of the Iranian resistance and said there was not a strain of evidence against them to prove any kind of terrorist activity. But this is a label that sticks. Even till today, you will see in statements or in news articles that they were on the terrorist list till 2012, but no one says why were they on the terrorist list. And that is what they use to demonize the resistance and that organized resistance, the legitimate resistance that exists. Another thing that exists is right now, as we are speaking, there are a lot of different interests when it comes to Iran, or different spins put on what is the solution, what is to come. There are some who try to suggest that the people of Iran they don't want this regime, so they have to return back to the previous one. That's not the case. The people of Iran want to move forward in the 21st century. They want to move forward to a secular democratic republic, meaning, not a theocracy, meaning also not the monarchy that used to rule Iran, because that was a dictatorship too. We want to move forward to, in the 21st century. And so there are those who tried to say, people want the return of the deposed Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi. And that's really not the case. I mean, the reality is that you hear it in the chants and the slogans of people inside Iran, especially in the universities. Since 2022, they've been saying, down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs, or no to the crown, no to the turban, yes to freedom and democracy. So that is the direction that the people of Iran want. And the reality is that those who try to promote return of monarchy, they have to think for a minute. The people of Iran revolted against the Shah and overthrew the Shah. We're not in the process of recycling dictators, but aside from that, on what merit is Reza Pahlavi, trying to present himself? This being the son of a dictator? That's not a merit to stand on. Has he done anything himself for the people of Iran in the past 47 years? He has never been able to form an organization that lasts more than, 6 months. He has no organized structure. He has no set plans. For the first time after 47 years, he's given a plan. He calls it the Iran Prosperity Project. If you read that, it's 172 pages or so. It's a blueprint for a dictatorship worse than his father's, because even his father's had some kind of checks and balances. This one has nothing. And it calls for the revival of the Sabak and the Immortal Guard. So it's just a rebranding of the current regime. And he continuously says that I depend on the IRGC and the suppressive forces and the free Iran and the Iran of tomorrow. And so that is not what the people of Iran are laying down their lives for. The people of Iran want to see change. They want to see a true democracy form. They don't want a puppet government anymore. The Shah's son, the only way that he can return to power is if he's installed. And he had made that clear. Just like a few weeks ago, he did an interview on Fox News, and he said, they asked him, would you be willing to return to Iran? And he said, definitely, but it would have to be properly orchestrated. The fact that that is like the word that comes to your mind, that it has to be properly orchestrated, shows that you have nothing yourself and you just depend on maybe a foreign government wanting to install you because you would serve their interest. And that is not what the people of Iran want. We want to have, as the National Council of Resistance, our sole goal is to be able to transfer sovereignty to the people of Iran, and for them to be able to create that democracy that they yearn for and that they've been fighting for 120 years.
Thank you for clarifying and explaining that so beautifully. From very limited personal experience, and I would not generalize this, a lot of people who have fled Iran, I have interacted, that they struggle with the identity, the acceptance of who they are and where do they stand because of the situation, because of the fear, because of the challenges. And it is not always humanly possible to accept and action based on that. In terms of identity, what is it you'd like to share with anyone listening to this conversation who have Iranian roots? What the resistance is trying to do? What does its leadership look like? And what is it that they need to know so that they can accept their identity wholeheartedly and welcome a new Iran?
Well, I think most Iranians have this understanding, but it's very important to differentiate between Iran and the regime. The regime of Iran is not the Iranian people. The Iranian people are not the regime. And that is, I think, the most key. I think that is like what most Iranians struggle with when they come abroad, because they feel like people perceive them as, the Iranian regime. I remember growing up in the US, a lot of Iranians, when they would ask you, like, where are you from? Or they were like, we're Persian. Instead of saying we're Iranian. And one time I had a teacher ask me, what's the difference? Like, we had formed an organization in our school, and he said, why have you named it the Persian Club instead of the Iranian Club? And I said, well, when people have these mindsets are like these ideas when you say each of these words, and they're not comparable. And so that's why we do that. And so to show him, I called a few people in the hallway and I told them, what comes to your mind when they say Persian? And they said, sophisticated, educated, rich culture, Persian rugs, beauty, history, all of these things. And they were all positive. And when I said, what comes to your mind when they say Iranian? And they said, terrorists, mullahs, destruction, this and that. And so I was like, now you understand. So that is the issue that Iranians deal with. But I think it's very important to identify yourself with the people of Iran, the resilient people of Iran, those who have never given in to the theocracy of Iran. I think that is something that sets us apart from a lot of different countries, because from day one, the people of Iran have never given in. This fight has been continuous. It's not like there hasn't been a day that the people of Iran haven't continued to resist in face of this regime. And I think that is very important. That is something that you don't see in many countries who even have dictatorships. You see there's a phase that people are silent completely, and then maybe something comes up. But in Iran, it hasn't been that way. And I think that is something that to take pride into. But also, what does the Iranian resistance represent for the future of Iran? I think that's a very important question, because it's easier to be against something than to understand what you're for. But we are very lucky to have a movement that is based on principles and values, and that is its driving force. The National Council of Resistance of Iran's plan for the interim government has been set forth since 1981, but what's important is that it has withstood the test of time. They have been able to show that the things that they believe in, it's not just in mere words or written on paper, it's in practice too. For the interim government would be, I guess, if you want to give like the clip notes of the plans for the interim government, it's the 10-point plan presented by Mrs. Rajavi. Mrs. Rajavi, Maryam Rajavi, she is the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the provisional government after the fall of the regime. She has dedicated over 5 decades of her life to the cause for freedom in Iran, and she has led this movement practically. She had been in the leadership of this movement for 4 decades now. And she has really been a trailblazer when it comes to this fight, but also in the women's empowerment too, or the emancipation of human beings, I think. So if you look at the 10-point plan, I think that instills like all those values that we stand for. It calls for, first of all, number one is the ballot box is the final criterion and the only criterion. And the second is, separation of religion, and the second is actually the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture and all of these suppressive organs of the regime. Then there is separation of religion and state. It calls for everyone's liberties to be safeguarded based on international treaties and whatnot. It calls for gender equality and, in fact, gender equity in a way. It calls for removing all those double standards when it comes to, unfortunately, the oppression of Iran's ethnicity. So it calls for recognizing their rights and the autonomy of Iran's ethnicities and respecting and supporting the minorities, be it religious minorities or whatever groups that there are in Iran. It calls for non-nuclear Iran. It calls for independent judiciary where Sharia law is completely revoked in Iran. And also that everyone is able to have their rights and liberties protected, and there's due process. It calls for free market economy. It calls for, I think when you look at it, it calls for non-nuclear Iran, and an Iran that is in peace and good relations with its neighbors. Unfortunately, right now, Iran is a destabilizing force in the region. Hopefully, it'll then become a stabilizing force, and one that would have a positive effect in the region. So I think that when you put those 10 points together, it really creates like a guardrail to make sure that we don't, steer off and continue to create a true democracy. And over 4,000 lawmakers have supported this 10-point plan. The majority of the U.S. Congress has supported this 10-point plan. Over 130 former heads of state have supported this 10-point plan. Over 100 Nobel laureates have supported it. So it has garnered a lot of international support. And it's very important because, as I said, it's not just mere words. It's backed with actions that people have seen on the ground for the last 4 decades. When this movement says they believe in gender equality, you see that 52% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran are women, and the president-elect is a woman. You see that like in the MEK, actually the entire leadership council are women, and all the secretary generals since 1989, so they have been women. when it calls for the rights of ethnicities or the rights of Iran's religious minorities. You see that in their practices and how they're represented in this council. So I think that the test of time is a true guarantee, and we hope to be able to see that the dawn of that free Iran soon.
This whole narrative is a remarkable arc of fortitude and resilience and courage. So I admire that, and thank you for coming to our platform and sharing your story. I hope it reaches and resonates with our audience. I think we covered context, the promises, the misconceptions, and the core messaging and leadership aspects of the resistance. Is there anything else you would like to add from your end that we haven't covered?
No, I think we covered everything, but I would like to ask those who are listening to stand by the people of Iran. And the specific call to actions that I would like to emphasize on is first, raising awareness. This is something that every single one of us can do. All of us can go on social media and echo those voices, and to be able to raise that awareness, because awareness is very important, I think. The second would be call on your lawmakers, ask them to stand by the people of Iran, support the people of Iran, recognize their fights in Iran. Right now, as I just mentioned, unfortunately, just this morning, 2 political prisoners were executed, Vahid Beni Amelian and Abul Hassan Montazir. And, ask your foreign ministries to make a statement, take a stance. The silence is like a green red light to the regime to continue these executions. And the regime has said time and time and again that, if I see my power in jeopardy, I will empty out the prisons of Iran with executions. So there have been over 600 executions since the beginning of January in Iran. Don't allow that to increase. So today is that day. Please voice your support and ask your governments to take a stance. I know it's the holidays and everything, but it's really critical right now. Also, if you would like to become active, reach out to iranfreedom.org. They could put you in contact with local chapters in whatever country that you are, because right now there's a lot of demonstrations, exhibits, activity with lawmakers that they are doing, and they really could use all the help that they can get. It is a very critical time for our people, so please share that, and also share that message with everyone. There is a third option on Iran. The solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's supporting the people of Iran. And the final solution is neither the current theocracy or the previous monarchy, which were dictators. We want to move forward to a secular democratic republic, which is represented by Maryam Rajavi and her 10-point plan. That is the gist of it. I greatly thank you for this opportunity to be able to share that with your viewers.
Thank you once again, and I echo your pledge to our listeners and viewers. I hope if you're listening from Australia, watching from Australia, please reach out to the chapter within the country so that you could support the people of Iran in this cause that they have been fighting for so many decades.